Hello, ninth graders. Thank you for continuing to read and follow along. We are on page 215 at the very bottom of the page. I think we might finish the book today. There is an epilogue that I'd like to share with you that we'll read tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, we will begin Silo. That is another book you received, and it is a science fiction book that takes place in a setting that we are actually experiencing. It takes place in the midst of a pandemic. So Silo is on for Wednesday. It will finish this book by tomorrow. So bottom of page 215. After 6:00 p.m. the next day, the men stood up at the top of a steep gully, looking down at the tents of Camp 2. It had taken them 10 hours to make their way down from Camp 4. With the light dimming over the mountain, they heard a sound that filled them with emotion. The Hunza porters had caught sight of them and stood below, shouting with joy up the slope. Ghulam, Valati, and Hidayat quickly roped up and started climbing. When they reached the exhausted group, the porters were sobbing. They hugged each of the climbers and lifted the packs from their backs. When they staggered into camp below, the Americans sat on sleeping bags that had been laid out on the rocks for them. The Hunzas, still weeping, pulled off their boots and fixed them rice and tea. For the first time in weeks, stars hung in the sky over the mountain. At one point, Karal Hundayat led the Hunzas in a Muslim prayer for Gilki. So you see a picture on the bottom of page 216 of Houston and Molinar with the porters at Camp 2. And look at that. You think they're laying on the land and the grass. Look at all those boulders. Do you see all the boulders and rocks? Their sleeping bags are on rock. And they look exhausted. It was a moving experience for Bates and the others. For days, their lives had hung on their own skill and effort, laboring to get the stove lit so they wouldn't die of thirst, willing themselves to the next handhold and the next. Now they gave themselves over to the Hunzas, who cared for them as though they were sick children. It seemed a profound thing to see such kindness and compassion stretched across languages and cultures. And so together they sat under the stars and cried. It's the deepest experience I've ever had with a human being, Bob Craig would remember a couple of days later at base camp. On August 16th, the Hunzas collected rocks from the glacier around base camp and stacked them in a 10-foot tower under the shadow of K2. George Bell and Bob Craig, who could no longer walk, watched from the tents while everyone else gathered around the somber gray cairn. Earlier, they had packed Gilkey's personal belongings to be carried out and sent home to his parents. Now they placed a poem and a letter in a small metal box with Gilkey's name on it and set it on the cairn. Bob Bates said a prayer. Then they went back to the tents to get ready for the trek to Askol and Skardu, and finally the voyage home. Art Gilkey was gone. But as the rest of them packed stoves and sleeping bags, tents and ropes, they knew they would be a part of each other's lives for a long time to come. We started as strangers, Houston will later say, but we came down the mountain as brothers. They hadn't reached the summit, but they had forged the bond that Houston talked about, the fellowship of the rope. On the ice slope near Camp 7, the half-inch strands of woven nylon that bound them together had nearly turned one man's slip into certain death for the rest of them. Then, with the help of Pete Schoenig and his ice axe, the ropes had saved them all. The next day, a procession of climbers and porters made their way down the Godwin-Austen Glacier. Bob Craig limped along under his own power. Several porters carried George Bell wrapped in a sleeping bag and strapped to a stretcher. Art Gilkey's body lay behind them somewhere on the slopes of K2. The mountain had been there for millions of years before they tried to climb it. and would be there for millions of years after they were gone. I think we'll stop there, and tomorrow we will finish the book. We'll read the epilogue on page 221, A Beautiful Failure. So thank you so much, ninth graders. It's been an amazing true story, and I look forward to sharing the next book with you, Silo, which will begin on Wednesday. Hope you have a really good day and you're taking care of yourselves. Bye now.